Yes. Well, it's interesting because I don't actually remember the dream itself. It was almost like an introduction to me. And so that was the seed that I came away as I woke up and was like, who is Lilith? I have to. And it was this sensation that I'm trying to find the word for. It was like this hunger. It was like, who is it? I need to know now. It was very impulsive. Like there was something that in me that was just driving this almost obsessive, frantic. I must find out who this is. And the interesting thing about this, I'll plant the seed, is that my true black moon Lilith is actually in Gemini conjunct my midheaven. And so I think over the years, Lilith would come in and out with ideas, with downloads, just threads of understanding. She planted a seed of a body of work that was called Eat the Forbidden Fruit.
And, maybe it's worth pausing here for a minute to just talk about the archetype herself for perhaps listeners who may have heard of Lilith, but aren't necessarily that familiar with what she is, first on a kind of a mythic level, but then also what she represents in the astrology. Yeah. So I wonder if you could sort of talk to that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I think what I can say is that when I work with Lilith, I don't just kind of mean as an archetype or a point in the chart, but really as something lived, as something embodied, and as something that guided me through some profound initiations. And so I want to kind of make that point that it's not necessarily, I think what I came to understand is that Lilith isn't something that we need to become. It's just something that we need to remember. And she often comes through these very experiences that break us open. And I think Lilith isn't just personal, but she's systemic. And she lives in these places that we've been conditioned and controlled and silenced, but also in the part of us that knows that that's not the truth. And, Lilith exists across multiple timelines and cultures and interpretations. And so each of us, tells us something very different about how she's understood or misunderstood. And so maybe it would be helpful to share a little bit about her. I'm going to call her story instead of history.
Sure. Absolutely. By all means.
So her story is, if we go back far enough, you find traces of Lilith-like figures in ancient Mesopotamia. And so, she's been associated with wind spirits, with night beings, feminine forces that really exist outside of domestication.
Yes. Right? I mean, here I'm thinking of the Burnley relief and the Queen of the Night.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The winged figure with the bird's claws standing on the lion with a crown. Yes.
Yes. I have that image in front of me, actually. Interestingly enough. But yeah. And so, of course, these weren't necessarily evil, but they were uncontained. And I think historically, anything that's been uncontained has been something societies have tried to control or they've tried to define.
Or demonize.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing, right? There's so many different interpretations of kind of Lilith pre-Christianity. And I think there's stories about Lilith taking form as part of the Anzu bird, too, this divine storm bird that created destruction. And this was in Sumeria, which is obviously modern Iraq. And this was around like 3000 BCE.
So this is the pre-Babylonian Mesopotamian culture, right? Sumerians, who we know very little about.
Right. And, there's also this association with Gilgamesh and the Halupu tree, which was originally planted at this time of creation near the Euphrates River. And, there's the story that Lilith built her house in the middle of this Halupu tree in the Garden of Inanna. And she was joined by this dragon serpent who built its nest at the roots of the tree. And the hero, in quotation marks, arrives on the scene. Gilgamesh arrives on the scenes and slays this dragon. And terrified Lilith tears down her house and then flees to the desert. And then, of course, there's this other story that we hear about Lilith as Inanna's handmaiden, and when Inanna descends into the underworld, it's Lilith who sends the helper and supports the healing of Inanna's sister, Ereshkigal. And then later we see Lilith appear. This is probably the first time that she appears as Adam's wife in the alphabet of Ben Sira. And so in that text, she is Adam's first wife, created equal, but she also refused to submit to Adam. And ultimately, she chose exile over subordination.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to go back a little bit because, that's the myth that most people know. But I think what interests me is, particularly given your time in Egypt, was, the Mesopotamian context, if you like, especially given the link to astrology. Because what interested me there, especially around like the Burnley relief, is first of all, how difficult it was, or it is still, for historians to actually say who the Queen of the Night is, for example. And they continue to try to come up with these possible explanations for who she might be. And in that sense, I thought it's interesting what you were saying about her defying categorization and so on. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was that certainly the British Museum was talking about her possibly being associated with Ereshkigal, who is sort of the dark twin to Ishtar. And it made me think of, in Egyptian cosmology, there's of course Isis and her sister Nephthys.
Yes.
Who are dual aspects of the same feminine archetype. And I thought it was very interesting that in the Burnley relief, for example, the Queen of the Night is standing on these two lions that are facing in opposite directions. And it made me think of the archet that you get in Egypt, which is the symbol for the horizon, which is two lions sort of facing either side, which interestingly is associated quite strongly through iconography with Nephthys. So, yes, I mean, it's quite nice to locate Lilith in a pre-Christian context.
Yes. Yeah.
Before she gets contained and before she gets demonized.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So getting back to your journey, I mean, so you had this dream about Lilith and you then felt compelled to research, and you then went on this study journey. But let's be honest, those types of journeys are very seldom just mental, in the sense that you're discovering facts and you're researching myths and that kind of thing. You're living it, you're processing, it's having an effect on you in terms of symbology on an internal level.
Yeah. Well, so I think I had this experience and then I wanted to do the intellectual study to some degree and then go back to the body to see for resonance. Because I think that's always the test of what the resonance is or how she's showing up in our world.
Interesting, again, in terms of the Gemini, that it's this dual experience.
Yeah.
I would say, judging by like my own experience of studying this kind of material, it's seldom just intellectual.
Oh, yeah.
That it's an initiation, actually.
Yeah.
And it's often what emerges during that process that then takes you onto the actual practice. Like, it's almost this kind of, I don't know whether you identify with this, but it's kind of like you feel compelled or pushed in a certain direction to study the symbol. The symbol pulls you forward and it directs the way that you study, what you look at when you're studying. And then that information continues to feed that process. But it's not just happening intellectually, it's also having an effect on you internally on an archetypal level.
Yes.
So you're changing internally. The story is having an effect on you. The symbols are having an effect on you. So that you're a living study. Robert Romanishon talks a lot about this.
Yeah.
Where you're the wounded researcher. So it's that wound that's driving you forward and pushing you to look in certain directions, perhaps intellectually. But the information that you're getting is almost like what Jung was doing, that night sea journey, where it's helping you to heal. It's giving you answers to questions that maybe parts of you are searching for. And then, certainly for me, it led to a kind of an integration afterwards of the knowledge that you then want to embody in a practice.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mentioned I'm an intuitive astrologer and I'm not the academic necessarily, because my experience has always been through the body, through the intuition and feeling into what's kind of hidden, what's not being spoken that really wants to be spoken. And so I think it's really reading between the lines and giving a chance for the client to speak and then seeing where these stories are showing up using the blueprint of this particular protocol of the asteroid Lilith, of the dark moon, of the true black moon Lilith, and the story in conjunction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. And I think a lot of the work that I've done through Koya, through embodiment, is all about embracing our wholeness. And so I think, Lilith gives us an opportunity to begin to dismantle the stigma that we have around the shadow, because it's part of who we are. If you're a human, you're going to experience hardship. You're going to experience death. You're going to experience these really hard parts of life, and you're going to need a tool to be able to navigate through that. It's unavoidable. So I feel that Lilith really, through my readings at least, really gives us an opportunity to talk about that, to be really honest,